On my wedding day, my entire family chose my son-in-law's birthday party over me, leaving me utterly alone. But just as I was about to walk down the aisle, a 5-word text from my daughter changed everything. Don't get married. Get out of there. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. For 15 years, my life was a museum, a quiet, perfectly preserved collection of memories dedicated to my late husband, Arthur. Every book on the shelf, every symphony I played on the piano, every rose in the garden was an exhibit in the life we'd built together. I was its faithful, solitary curator. I polished the memories, kept them safe from the dust of new experiences, and believed my heart was full. I was wrong. It was just safely empty. Finding Robert was like throwing open the windows in a sealed room. He didn't try to replace the exhibits. He just let the sunlight in. He was an architect, a man who understood foundations and blueprints, and he saw the woman who had built the museum, not just the ghost who haunted it. After a year of quiet dinners, long walks, and the slow, thrilling rediscovery of my own laughter, he asked me to marry him. He didn't get down on one knee. We were just sitting on a park bench, watching the autumn leaves fall, and he turned to me, his eyes full of a gentle, steady light, and said, "Evelyn, I want to build a new life, with you." I said yes before he'd even finished the sentence. A tidal wave of joy, 15 years in the making, crashed over me. I couldn't wait to tell my daughter, Clara. She was my world, the last, most precious piece of my life with Arthur. We met for lunch the next day at our favorite little bistro. When I slid the simple, elegant ring from my finger and placed it on the table between us, her face lit up with pure, unadulterated happiness. "Mom!" she shrieked, her voice drawing smiles from the tables around us. She launched herself across the table to hug me, smelling of her familiar lavender perfume. "Oh my God, I'm so happy for you. It's about time. Robert is wonderful." For a perfect crystalline moment, everything was right. The world was bright and full of promise. I felt young again, vibrant, a woman on the verge of a new beginning, blessed by the one person whose approval mattered most. The moment shattered that evening. We were at Clara's house for dinner. The smell of roasted chicken filled the warm, inviting space. Robert was by my side, his hand resting reassuringly on my back. Clara was still buzzing with excitement, talking a mile a minute about wedding plans. And then my son-in-law, Julian, cleared his throat. It wasn't a cough. It was a sound engineered for control, a sharp, intrusive noise designed to halt the conversation and pivot the room's attention directly onto him. That's just wonderful news, Evelyn," he said. His voice was a smooth, practiced performance of warmth, a velvet glove over a fist of iron. "We are so, so happy for you." He paused, letting the silence hang for a beat too long. A look of theatrical concern clouded his handsome, chiseled features. "There's just one small thing." I felt Robert's hand tense slightly on my back. Julian continued, his eyes fixed on me. "You mentioned a date. What was it again?" "September 20th, I said, my own smile starting to feel tight, stretched thin. Julian's face fell in a perfectly rehearsed pantomime of dawning tragedy. He pulled out his phone, his brow furrowed as he tapped the screen. The performance was flawless. He looked up, his expression a masterpiece of carefully orchestrated dismay. "Oh, Evelyn, no," he sighed, his voice a low, mournful note. "I can't believe the coincidence. That's my 40th birthday." The air in the room went thin and cold. Clara's bright, happy expression collapsed into a mask of confusion, then stress. Her eyes darted between me and her husband, her mind already caught in the invisible gears of a trap she couldn't see. "Your birthday?" she said, her voice small. "Oh, Julian, with all the excitement, I I completely forgot. Of course you did, honey, he said, his voice dripping with false magnanimity. He reached out and took her hand, his touch both a comfort and a clear physical act of claiming her allegiance. You were excited for your mom. It's completely understandable. He turned his gaze back to me, his eyes full of a deep, sorrowful apology that I knew, with a sudden, chilling certainty, was utterly false. Evelyn, I'm so sorry. This is just a terrible, terrible coincidence. A once-in-a-lifetime milestone for me and the happiest day of your new life. What are we going to do? He didn't frame it as his problem. He framed it as our problem. A shared family tragedy that had befallen us all, with him as the noble, suffering victim. He had just placed an impossible choice on my daughter's shoulders, and he had done it with a surgeon's precision. I immediately tried to defuse it, to release Clara from the terrible pressure. Oh, goodness, don't you worry for a second, I said, forcing a light, airy laugh. We can change the date. It's no trouble at all. I'm sure the venue has other openings. But Julian was already shaking his head, his expression morphing into one of noble sacrifice. No, Evelyn, you can't do that, he said, his voice firm, authoritative. This is your day. You've had your heart set on it. We wouldn't dream of asking you to change it. We'll have to figure something out. Checkmate. By refusing my offer, he made himself look gracious while ensuring the conflict remained. He had created an intractable problem and then martyred himself upon it, leaving me looking like the one making unreasonable demands on the family's time. The rest of the evening was a masterclass in subtle manipulation. Julian spoke of his upcoming milestone birthday with a kind of regretful excitement, talking about the small get-together he and Clara had been planning. He never said it directly, but the message was clear. His 40th was a non-negotiable event of immense importance. My wedding was no longer a joyful celebration. It was now a scheduling conflict, an inconvenient sideshow competing with the main event. As they left that night, Clara gave me a strained, apologetic hug. The pure joy from lunch was gone, replaced by the weary, anxious look of a woman being torn in two. Julian, however, gave me a warm, reassuring smile that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. Don't you worry, Evelyn, he said, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. We'll make it work. But I saw the flicker of triumphant satisfaction in his gaze. He had taken my happiest moment and turned it into a weapon. And I knew, with a terrible sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, that this was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, Julian's polite concern metastasized into a full-blown psychological war. He never attacked me directly. His methods were far too sophisticated for that. Instead, he waged a quiet war of attrition, and his weapon of choice was the ghost of my late husband. Julian appointed himself the guardian of Arthur's legacy, a legacy he subtly implied my newfound happiness was desecrating. The attacks were small, insidious, and always delivered with a veneer of loving concern. It started with a phone call 2 weeks after our announcement. Evelyn, he said, his voice oozing warmth, I was just looking at that old photo of you and Arthur at Clara's graduation. You two are the perfect couple, a love like that. It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing, isn't it? The implication hung in the air between us, thick and poisonous. My love for Arthur was a finite, sacred resource. My relationship with Robert was a cheap imitation, a consolation prize for a lonely old woman. My hand tightened on the receiver. I was very lucky, Julian. The luckiest, he agreed, his voice smooth as silk. Arthur was one of a kind. Such big shoes to fill. He was even more effective with Clara, preying on the deep, unresolved grief she still carried for her father. I wouldn't hear it from him, of course. I'd hear it from my daughter, who would repeat his comments with a troubled, confused expression, completely unaware she was delivering poison-tipped darts on his behalf. Julian was saying the other night, "How hard this must be for you, Mom," she told me over the phone one evening. Her voice was hesitant. He said he just hopes this Robert fellow understands how much Dad meant to this family, how big his shoes are to fill. There it was again, that phrase. He was framing Robert not as a partner for me, but as a replacement for her father, a role no man could ever successfully fill. He was setting an impossible standard, ensuring Robert would always fall short in Clara's eyes. His most insidious tactic was the way he began to speak of my home, the home I had shared with Arthur for 30 years, as a kind of sacred, untouchable museum. When I mentioned I was thinking of repainting the living room, a project Robert, with his architect's eye and kind heart, had offered to help with, the report came back through Clara. "Julian thinks it might be a bit soon, Mom," she said, her voice cautious. "He just feels like so much of Dad's presence is still in that room. He's worried that changing it will feel like you're erasing him." My own home. He was turning my own home into a prison of memory, a place where any change, any step toward a new future, was an act of desecration against the sainted husband and father. He was appointing himself the high priest of my grief, and he was using his position to isolate me, to make me feel guilty for the very happiness I had fought so hard to find. One Saturday, Robert came over to fix a leaky faucet in the kitchen. It was a small thing, but as he worked, his brow furrowed in concentration, I felt a wave of simple domestic contentment. When he finished, he wiped his hands and smiled. All set. Now, about that living room. I was thinking a warm cream color would really brighten up the space. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. It was a picture message from Julian. No text, just a photo. It was of him and Arthur, taken years ago on a fishing trip. They were both grinning, holding up a large bass. A perfect shot of male bonding. A perfect reminder of the man who was here first. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a coincidence. Clara must have mentioned Robert was coming over. This was a warning shot, a digital reminder of who this house, and by extension, I, truly belong to. "What is it?" Robert asked, seeing the look on my face. I couldn't bring myself to show him. "Just a memory," I said, forcing a smile. The effect on the wider family was subtle, but undeniable. I would hear it in the hesitant tone of my sister's voice when she asked about the wedding plans, and the way my cousins would expertly steer the conversation back to the good old days with Arthur whenever I mentioned Robert. Julian was conducting a whisper campaign, and it was working. He was successfully painting a picture of me as a slightly confused, grief-stricken widow rushing into a new relationship with a stranger. A woman who needed to be protected from her own foolish, lonely heart. And he, of course, was the noble, concerned son-in-law, the man who was only trying to protect the memory of the great man who had come before him. The truth, the cold, hard, ugly truth, was that he wasn't protecting Arthur's memory. He was protecting what he saw as his and Clara's inheritance. My happiness was a threat to his control, and he was methodically, expertly, turning my own family against me to neutralize it. The small, mournful get-together for his 40th birthday was about to become his primary weapon. He just needed to make it an offer no one could refuse. The small get-together Julian had so mournfully described on the night of my engagement announcement began to undergo a stunning and rapid transformation. It was a masterclass in social warfare, designed to force the entire family to choose a side and demonstrate, in the most public way possible, where the true center of power in our family now lay. It began with a phone call from Clara, her voice a strange mixture of manufactured excitement and genuine apology. "Mom, you are not going to believe this." she said, her words rushing out in a torrent. Julian's partners at the firm found out it was his 40th, and they've decided to throw him a surprise party. They're insisting. It's gotten completely out of his hands. A surprise party. The lie was so audacious it almost made me laugh. I could picture Julian perfectly, feigning shock and humble reluctance, while meticulously pulling every string. His hands were so firmly on the wheel of this production, they were probably leaving fingerprints. The surprise party quickly escalated. A week later, I learned through the family grapevine, my cousin Sarah, who always had the latest gossip, that the venue was no longer their house. "It's on a yacht, Evelyn, a massive 3-tiered yacht, chartered for a sunset cruise around the harbor," Sarah gushed. "Can you even imagine?" Oh, I could imagine. I could imagine the gleam in Julian's eyes as he planned it. The guest list grew exponentially. It was no longer a few close friends. It was a who's who of the city's legal and business elite. It was becoming an event so glamorous, so exclusive, so irresistibly ostentatious, that it made my own modest wedding ceremony at the local botanical garden seem like a drab, insignificant affair. Then, the invitations arrived. They weren't simple cards. They were thick, engraved monstrosities, nestled in velvet-lined boxes and delivered by courier. I received one, of course. It sat on my coffee table like a small, ornate coffin. Opening it felt like an invitation to my own execution. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the 40th birthday of Julian Pierce with a sunset champagne cruise." The date was printed in bold, elegant script. September 20th, my wedding day. He sent them to every single member of my extended family. My sisters, my brothers, my cousins, even my elderly aunts who rarely left their homes. It was a calculated power move, forcing everyone to make a very public choice. On one side was my quiet, second-chance wedding to a man they barely knew. On the other was a spectacular, once-in-a-lifetime party for the powerful, successful man who was now the undisputed patriarch of the family. It was a battle I had no chance of winning. The phone calls began almost immediately, a symphony of flimsy, apologetic excuses. My sister Carol was the first to fall. "Evelyn, I am so terribly sorry," she said, her voice dripping with a false regret that was almost more insulting than the truth. "But you know how much Julian has done for my son, getting him that internship at his firm. We simply have to make an appearance at his party. We'll try to come to the wedding for a few minutes first, of course, but we can't miss the boat." The unspoken threat hung in the air. Julian's generosity had a price, and that price was loyalty. My cousin David called next, his apology even less convincing. "Ev, it's a yacht. I've never been on a yacht. We'll be thinking of you, though. Promise." One by one, they chose the glittering, hollow spectacle over the quiet, heartfelt sincerity of my wedding. They were choosing power over love, glamour over loyalty. They were choosing Julian. The final, most crushing blow came not as a phone call, but during a visit from Clara. She sat stiffly on my sofa, the velvet invitation box still on the table between us. "Mom," she started, her voice barely a whisper. "Julian was talking to the caterers for his party." She couldn't even look at me. "He found out they use the same supplier as the botanical gardens. He's worried about quality control, overlap. He thinks it might be better, safer, if we just focus all the resources on one event." I stared at her, my mind struggling to process the sheer, breathtaking audacity of the statement. He was trying to sabotage my catering. He was suggesting my wedding be uncatered to benefit his party. "Clara," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "do you hear what you're saying? Do you hear what he is saying?" Tears welled in her eyes. I know it sounds bad, Mom. I know. But he's just so stressed. His partners are putting so much pressure on him for this party to be perfect. He's not thinking clearly. But he was. He was thinking with perfect ice-cold clarity. He wasn't just scheduling a competing event. He was staging a coup. And he was using my own daughter as his mouthpiece. So what are you telling me, Clara? I asked, my heart feeling like a block of ice in my chest. Are you coming to my wedding? She finally looked at me, her face a mess of guilt and misery. I have to be there for him, Mom. It's his 40th birthday. His partners will be there. I'm his wife. Each word was a nail in the coffin of the joy I had felt just a few weeks ago. I was to be a queen on my wedding day, but I would be reigning over an empty kingdom. Julian had won. To justify this grand, cruel act of social warfare, Julian needed more than just a scheduling conflict. He needed to give the family a moral justification for their abandonment, a way for them to feel not like they were betraying me, but like they were protecting me. And so, he escalated his campaign of doubt, turning his vague, insidious whispers about Robert into a full-blown, unofficial investigation. He began planting seeds of active suspicion in Clara's mind, preying on her protective instincts and her deep-seated fear of seeing me hurt again. He knew that if he could convince Clara that Robert was a threat, the rest of the family would fall in line behind her. His methods were, as always, maddeningly subtle. He would wait for moments when Clara was stressed or tired. Then he would strike. She confessed one of these moments to me later, her voice thick with shame. They were getting ready for bed, and she was exhausted from a long week at work. "You know, honey," Julian had said, his tone one of loving, husbandly concern as he straightened his tie in the mirror. "I was just thinking about Robert. It's strange, isn't it, that a man that successful, that handsome, is still single at his age. I mean, besides the first wife who passed. It just seems odd." "Julian, don't start," Clara had sighed, weary of the conversation before it even began. "I'm not starting anything," he said, his voice the epitome of reason. "I'm just concerned. Your mother is a wealthy woman, Clara. She's vulnerable. We don't really know anything about this man's past. Where did he come from? What are his finances really like? Has anyone even checked?" He let the questions hang in the air, venomous seeds planted in the fertile ground of her anxiety. A few days later, he struck again. I had given Clara a beautiful antique locket of her grandmother's to wear on my wedding day. When she showed it to Julian, his reaction was a performance of quiet devastation. He saw the locket and his face just fell, Clara told me, her own face clouded with worry. He said it was beautiful, but then he got this sad look in his eye and said, "Your dad would have loved to see you wear that while your mom started her new chapter." Then he just got quiet. He said he was worried that Robert wouldn't appreciate the history, that he'd see all of our family heirlooms as just assets. Assets. He was painting Robert as a predator, a gold digger circling my family's legacy. He was twisting every gesture of love and continuity into a financial transaction. The pressure on Clara became immense. Julian began to speak of my upcoming marriage not as a happy event, but as a situation that needed to be managed. He would have hushed phone calls in his study, closing the door when Clara walked by. He would leave web pages open on his laptop for investment fraud and background check services, knowing she would see them. He was creating an atmosphere of constant, low-grade paranoia. He was making Clara feel that her love for me was incompatible with her duty to protect me. The breaking point came one evening about 2 weeks before the wedding. I had dinner with Robert and Clara, hoping a relaxed evening could mend some of the growing friction. Julian conveniently had to work late. Robert was charming and kind, asking Clara about her work, telling a funny story about a difficult client. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the old warmth in Clara's eyes. I allowed myself to hope. As Robert and I were leaving, he helped me with my coat. He put his arm around my shoulder and kissed my temple. It was a simple, affectionate gesture. I saw Clara watch us from the doorway, and for a second, she smiled. The next morning, she called me, her voice trembling. "Mom, Julian and I had a fight last night," she said. "What about, sweetheart?" I asked, my heart sinking. He saw Robert kiss you goodbye. He said it looked performative." That's the word he used. Performative. Like he was putting on a show for me. He said he has a bad feeling, Mom. A really, really bad feeling. He said as the man of this family, it's his duty to protect you, even if you can't see the danger yourself. The man of the family. The phrase hung in the air, an audacious claim to a throne that wasn't his. He thinks we should run a background check on Robert," Clara whispered, the words sounding like a betrayal even to her own ears. "Just to be safe. To put our minds at ease." I was stunned into silence. A background check on the kind, decent man I loved. It was a profound violation, a disgusting invasion of privacy. "Clara, absolutely not," I said, my voice shaking with a cold fury. "That is a monstrous idea. How dare he even suggest it?" "I know, Mom, I know," she cried, her voice breaking. "I told him that. But he has me so worried. He keeps saying, 'What if we're wrong? What if something happens to her?' He said if I won't do it, he will. And he'll make sure the whole family knows why." It was a threat and a trap, all in one. He had cornered her. He had turned her love for me into a weapon to be used against my own happiness. And as I listened to my daughter's broken sobs, I realized with a chilling finality that Julian wasn't just trying to win a social battle anymore. He was trying to burn my new life to the ground before it even had a chance to begin. Clara's decision to run the background check was an act of pure desperation. It was a frantic attempt to silence the chorus of doubts her husband had so masterfully conducted in her mind. She told me later, in the wreckage of it all, that her hand trembled as she typed Robert's name into the online portal of a discreet investigation service. A profound sense of shame, a deep, sickening guilt at this profound invasion of privacy, washed over her. But Julian's voice was in her ear, a constant whisper of predators and hidden secrets, and her fear for my safety had finally, tragically, outweighed her respect for my autonomy. She clicked the button, paid the fee with her own credit card, and then spent the next 48 hours in a state of agonizing suspense. She was trapped in a terrible paradox, half praying the report would come back completely clean, and half praying it would contain some small, damning detail that would justify her betrayal. The report arrived in her inbox on the afternoon of September 19th, the day before my wedding. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely open the encrypted file. The report was, for the most part, exactly what she had hoped for, and exactly what Julian had feared. It was a clean, unremarkable history. Robert Peterson was exactly who he said he was. He was a highly respected, award-winning architect. His career was impeccable. His finances were in perfect order. His first wife had indeed died of cancer, just as he had said. He was, by all available accounts, a good, honest man. Clara felt a wave of profound, dizzying relief wash over her, a relief so intense it almost made her weep. But that relief was immediately followed by a fresh, sickening wave of shame. She had violated the trust of this good man. And for what? To appease the paranoid fantasies of her manipulative husband. She was about to close the file, to drag the report into her computer's trash bin, and try to forget this ugly episode ever happened, when her eyes caught a small, anomalous detail tucked away in a section on his early life. It was a footnote from a past he had never mentioned. The report detailed a business he had started in his 20s, long before he became a successful architect. It was a small construction company, a partnership with his brother, and in the fine print there was a record of a bankruptcy, a business failure from over 40 years ago that had left him with a mountain of debt it had taken him years to repay. The report also listed a single estranged child from his first marriage, a son he had not had contact with in over 30 years, a painful casualty of a difficult divorce. It was a secret, yes, a painful, deeply buried part of his past. But it was not a crime. It was not a scandal. It was a human story of failure and loss, of a young man's ambition curdling into shame. Clara, in her heart, understood this. But she also knew that in the hands of her husband, this human story could be twisted into a deadly weapon. That evening, as the final preparations were being made for my wedding, she confronted Julian. She didn't intend for it to be a confrontation. She intended it to be a confession, an apology for her own weakness. She showed him the report, intending to say, "Look, I was wrong. You were wrong. He's a good man. This is just a sad story from a long time ago. We need to stop this." But Julian didn't give her the chance. The moment he saw the words bankruptcy and estranged child, his eyes lit up with a look of vicious, triumphant vindication. He didn't see a human story. He saw ammunition. "I knew it," he exclaimed, his voice a low, triumphant hiss. He snatched the phone from her hand, his thumb scrolling furiously. "I told you, Clara. The man is a liar. He's a fraud." "Julian, no," Clara pleaded, her voice desperate as she saw the narrative already taking shape in his eyes. "This was 40 years ago. He was just a kid. It has nothing to do with who he is now. And the son, it's just sad. It was a bad divorce." But Julian was not interested in sadness or in context. He had his proof. His expression hardened into a mask of righteous fury. "He has been lying to your mother this entire time," he declared, his voice rising, performing for an audience of one. "He is hiding a failed business and a secret family. He is a con man, and he is after her money. Just like I said, we have to protect her. The family needs to know." Before Clara could stop him, he began to make calls. He stood in their living room, Clara's phone in his hand, and systematically began to dismantle my wedding day. He called my sister, Carol. He called my brother, Mark. He called my cousins. He spun a tale of a dangerous, secretive man who had wormed his way into my life. A man with a hidden past of financial failure and secret children. He twisted Robert's past shame into a present-day threat, his narrative a masterpiece of malicious exaggeration and calculated omission. He used Clara's reluctant, guilt-ridden confirmation as his ultimate weapon. "Clara is devastated," he would say into the phone, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "She discovered it all herself. She's so brave. She's heartbroken for her mother, but she knew she had to find the truth." He wasn't just exposing a secret. He was cementing the family's decision to abandon my wedding. He was giving them the moral high ground. They were no longer just choosing a better party. They were making a noble stand to protect their vulnerable, foolish matriarch from a dangerous predator. And as Clara stood there, frozen in horror, watching her husband systematically destroy her mother's happiness with the story she herself had unearthed, she finally began to understand the true nature of the man she had married. His concern was not for her mother, it was for himself, and his victory had just become absolute. The morning of September 20th dawned bright and clear, a perfect, brilliant autumn day, the kind of day a bride dreams of. I awoke in my own bed, a sense of serene, joyful calm settling over me. Today, I was not a widow. I was not a museum curator. I was a woman on the verge of a new beginning. I spent the morning in a happy, quiet daze, sipping tea, talking on the phone with my closest friends who were flying in for the ceremony. I did not hear from my family. Not from my sister, not from my brother, not from Clara. A small cold knot of dread had begun to form in my stomach, but I pushed it down. I told myself they were busy, that they were getting ready for the two big events of the day. I refused to let their silence cloud the perfect blue sky of my happiness. I arrived at the Botanical Gardens Grand Conservatory a few hours before the ceremony. The place was a paradise of glass and green, filled with towering palm trees and the sweet, intoxicating scent of 1,000 blooming flowers. The small, elegant space we had chosen was set up with rows of white chairs, a floral archway dripping with orchids, and a string quartet softly rehearsing in the corner. It was everything I had dreamed of. But as the minutes ticked by, as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, the beautiful empty chairs began to feel less like a promise and more like a judgment. My friends began to arrive, their warm hugs and happy congratulations, a stark, painful contrast to the echoing silence from my own family. I retreated to the small bridal suite, a lovely sun-filled room overlooking the gardens, to get dressed. My hands were shaking slightly as I zipped up my dress, a simple, elegant gown of ivory lace. The knot of dread in my stomach was now a cold, heavy stone. And then the text messages began, a coordinated digital fusillade of betrayal. The first was from my sister, Carol. "Evelyn, so sorry. Something has come up. Won't be able to make it to the ceremony, but will try to stop by the reception later. Have a wonderful day." 5 minutes later, my brother Mark. "So sorry, Ev. Crisis at work. Thinking of you. We'll see you at Jay's party tonight." Then came the flood, one after another. My cousins, my aunts, my uncles. The people whose births, weddings, and funerals I had attended without fail for my entire life. All sent their flimsy, last-minute apologies. Their excuses were a transparent lie, a thin veil of politeness draped over a cold, hard act of abandonment. Something came up. Last-minute emergency. Thinking of you. The almost identical wording made it clear this was not a series of individual decisions. This was a verdict, delivered by text message. An execution order from Julian, carried out by his loyal foot soldiers. They had chosen the yacht. They had chosen Julian. I sat on the small velvet settee in the bridal suite, my beautiful dress feeling like a costume for a play that had just been canceled. The heartbreak was a physical thing, a sharp, crushing weight on my chest. I had endured the long, lonely years after Arthur's death with a quiet stoicism. I had never asked for their pity, never burdened them with my grief. This new love, this second chance with Robert, was the first thing I had wanted for myself in 15 years. And they had, with a casual collective cruelty, decided I did not deserve it. I looked at my reflection in the ornate mirror. I saw a 62-year-old woman, a bride with no family, a queen with no court. But as I looked closer, past the tears welling in my eyes, I saw something else too. I saw the quiet, resilient strength that had carried me through the darkest days of my life. I had survived the death of my soulmate. I would survive this. I would not let them break me. I would not give Julian the satisfaction. I would walk down that aisle, my head held high, and I would marry the good man who was waiting for me, surrounded by the friends who had chosen to show up. I stood up, took a deep, steadying breath, and prepared to walk out of that room and into my new life. And that's when my phone buzzed one last time. It was a text from a number I knew by heart. The one number whose silence all day had been the most painful of all. It was from my daughter, Clara. I opened it, my heart bracing for another hollow apology, another flimsy excuse. But the words on the screen were not an excuse. They were a terrifying, world-altering command. 5 words that blew my world off its axis. Don't get married. Get out of there. We need to talk urgently. The words on my phone screen seemed to hover in the air, a stark black and white declaration of war against my own happiness. Don't get married. Get out of there. We need to talk urgently. My mind, already reeling from the coordinated betrayal of my entire family, struggled to make sense of this new terrifying assault. The message was from Clara. My Clara. The daughter who, just moments ago, I believed was part of the conspiracy to abandon me, was now sending a frantic, desperate warning. The contradiction was so profound, so jarring, that for a moment I thought I must be hallucinating, that the grief and the shock had finally broken something inside my mind. I read the message again and again. The words didn't change. They were a siren, a scream in the digital silence. I stood frozen in the bridal suite. The gentle, hopeful melodies of the string quartet drifted in from the conservatory, a mocking soundtrack to the complete and utter implosion of my world. My first thought was that this was another one of Julian's games, a final, cruel twist of the knife designed to inflict the maximum possible pain. Had he coerced her into sending this? Was this his way of not just ruining my wedding day, but of destroying my faith in the one person left on this earth whom I trusted completely? The thought was so ugly, so monstrous, it almost took my breath away. But then I read the message again, and I saw the raw, unedited panic in the capitalized words, in the lack of punctuation. This wasn't the slick, calculated manipulation of Julian. This was the authentic, terrified voice of my daughter. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. I was faced with an impossible, soul-destroying choice. Down the hall, in a sun-drenched conservatory filled with flowers, a good, kind man was waiting for me. A man who had offered me a second chance at a life I thought was over. He was my future, my hope, my quiet, peaceful harbor after 15 years on a lonely sea. To trust Clara would be to trust the one person who had already broken my heart today. To ignore her would be to risk ignoring a danger so great it had compelled her to betray her own husband's celebration. The wedding coordinator knocked softly on the door. "Mrs. Monroe, it's time. Your guests are seated." My guests. A small, loyal handful of my own friends. A sea of empty chairs where my family should have been. I looked at myself in the mirror one last time. My carefully constructed composure was cracking. What was I to do? Walk down that aisle, pretending I hadn't seen my daughter's desperate plea? Or obey her cryptic command, halt the ceremony, and humiliate the one good man who had stood by me, all on the word of a daughter who had chosen a yacht party over her own mother's wedding? My heart was being torn in two, but in the end, there was only one choice I could make. The bond between a mother and a child, no matter how frayed, no matter how damaged, is a primal, powerful thing. I would not, walk down that aisle with her terrified words echoing in my mind. With a hand that trembled so badly I could barely control it, I picked up my phone and texted my best friend, Maria, who was waiting for me outside the door. "Emergency. Stall them. Tell Robert I am so sorry. I'll explain everything." Then I slipped out a side door, my beautiful ivory gown trailing behind me like a ghost. I walked into the fading afternoon light and left my own wedding, a fugitive from a happiness that had been just moments before, finally within my grasp. I met Clara at a quiet, anonymous hotel bar a few miles from the Botanical Gardens. I had taken a taxi, my wedding dress drawing stares, but I was in a state of shock, my mind a numb, buzzing void. I saw her sitting in a dark corner booth before she saw me. She looked terrible. Her glamorous party dress was rumpled, her eyes were red and swollen from crying, and her face was a mask of guilt and frantic anxiety. She was a world away from the confident, happy woman I had raised. The moment she saw me, she burst into a fresh torrent of tears, a storm of ugly, broken sobs. "Mom," she wept, her voice thick and ragged. "Oh, Mom, I am so sorry. I am so sorry for everything." I sat down opposite her, a strange cold calm settling over me. The worst had already happened. Now, all that was left were the answers. "What is it, Clara?" I asked, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "What was so urgent that you couldn't have told me this morning? What was so important that you had to destroy my wedding day to tell me?" Her tears subsided, replaced by a look of profound, gut-wrenching shame. "It's Robert," she whispered, her eyes refusing to meet mine. "Mom, he's not who you think he is. He's been lying to you." She then recounted the entire sordid story. She told me about Julian's campaign of whispers, about the seeds of doubt he had so expertly planted, and she confessed, her voice cracking with self-loathing, to running the background check. "I was so scared, Mom," she pleaded, desperate for me to understand. "Julian had me so convinced that Robert was some kind of predator, that he was after your money. I was just so afraid of you getting hurt again." She pulled out her phone and showed me the report. She showed me the hidden details of Robert's past. The bankruptcy of a business he had started in his 20s, the estranged son from a marriage that had ended over 3 decades ago. "He's a liar, Mom," she said, her voice gaining a note of her husband's righteous certainty. "He never told you about any of this. He has a secret family, a history of financial failure. Julian was right. The man is a fraud." I listened to her, and I looked at the report on her phone. And in that moment, in that dark, sterile hotel bar, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. But it was not the puzzle she thought she was solving. As I listened to my daughter parrot her husband's narrative, as I saw the genuine fear and conviction in her eyes, I realized the true nature of the crime that had been perpetrated. The secret of Robert's past was not the issue. It was a sad human story of failure and loss from a lifetime ago. The real issue was the disproportionate, malicious, and masterfully manipulative way Julian had used that secret. I saw with a terrible, soul-crushing clarity that Julian's concern was never, not for a single moment, about protecting me. It was, and always had been, about controlling me. He saw my marriage to Robert as a threat to his position as patriarch, a threat to his influence over my daughter, and most importantly, a threat to the inheritance he felt he was owed. He hadn't been protecting me from a predator. He had been the predator all along, a wolf in the expensive clothing of a concerned son-in-law, and he had turned my own daughter into his unwilling accomplice. Clara, seeing the strange, quiet calm on my face, trailed off. She had expected me to be horrified, grateful for her intervention. She did not expect the profound, pitying sadness she now saw in my eyes. And as she looked at me, really looked at me, she finally began to see how thoroughly she had been played. "He wanted this," she whispered, the realization hitting her with the force of a physical blow. "He wanted to ruin today. He wanted everyone to choose him." I simply nodded, my heart aching for her. "Yes, sweetheart, he did." Her composure finally broke completely. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with a new kind of sob, not of panic, but of profound, soul-deep shame. "What have I done?" she wept. "Oh, Mom, what have I done?" I did not offer her empty comforts. I offered her the hard, clean truth. "You allowed yourself to be manipulated, Clara. You made a terrible mistake, but it is not too late to fix it." I left her there in the hotel bar, a broken woman who was perhaps, for the first time, beginning to see her life clearly. I had my own mistake to fix. I took a taxi to Robert's house, my mind a whirlwind of fear and hope. What would I say? How could I possibly explain the beautiful, tragic mess of my family? Every traffic light felt like an eternity. By the time the taxi pulled up to his curb, my heart was hammering against my ribs. He opened the door before I could even ring the bell. His face was a mask of confusion and deep, profound hurt. He was still in his tuxedo, but it was rumpled now, his tie loosened. He looked like a man who had been waiting for a celebration that had turned into a wake. "Evelyn," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. "What happened? Are you all right?" And there on his doorstep, in my ridiculous, poignant wedding dress, I told him everything. I told him about Julian's campaign of cruelty, about the forced choice of the birthday party, about my family's betrayal. And then, taking a deep breath that felt like I was inhaling glass, I told him about the background check and about the secret Clara had found. As I spoke the words bankruptcy and estranged son, I saw a look of deep, profound shame cross his handsome features. He looked down at the ground, unable to meet my eyes. He didn't deny it. He didn't try to lie. He simply nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "It's true," he whispered, his voice hoarse with a shame that was decades old. "All of it." He invited me inside, and we sat in his quiet living room, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows on the floor. He told me his story. He told me of a foolish, ambitious young man who had made a series of terrible business decisions, a failure that had cost him everything and had taken him years of grueling work to recover from. He told me of a bitter, painful divorce, and of a son who had chosen to side with his mother, a wound that had never truly healed. "I was going to tell you, Evelyn," he said, his eyes finally meeting mine. They were filled with tears. "I swear I was. I was just so afraid. My life with you, it felt so perfect, so clean. I was ashamed of the messy, broken parts of my past. I was afraid that if you saw them, you wouldn't want me." His confession, his vulnerability, his profound, deeply human fear didn't push me away. It pulled me closer than I had ever been. In that moment, I didn't see a liar or a fraud. I saw a good man, a man I loved, who had been carrying a heavy burden of shame for a lifetime. I saw the man Julian had tried to destroy, and the man I now knew, with absolute certainty, I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. I reached out and took his hand. "Robert," I said, my own voice now thick with emotion, "there is nothing you could tell me that would ever make me leave you." A single tear tracked down his cheek. "What about your family? Your daughter?" "My daughter made a mistake," I said, my voice hardening with a new resolve. "And my son-in-law has declared war. It's time I started fighting back." 2 hours later, Clara arrived at Robert's house. I had called her. Her face was pale, her eyes still puffy, but there was a new, steely determination in her gaze. She walked straight to Robert and looked him in the eye. "Robert, I am so deeply, truly sorry for what I did," she said, her voice clear and steady. "It was a violation, and it was wrong. I let my fear and my husband control me. I hope someday you can forgive me." Robert just nodded, his expression gentle. "Thank you, Clara. That means a great deal." The real confrontation happened an hour after that. Julian, furious that Clara had abandoned his party and was not answering his calls, had used a tracking app on her phone to find her. He pulled up to the house, his luxury car spitting gravel, and stormed to the door. Robert opened it. Julian stood on the porch, his face a thundercloud of rage. "Where is my wife?" he demanded. "She's here, Julian," I said, stepping into the doorway to stand beside Robert. Clara appeared behind us. His eyes, cold and furious, landed on me. What is this, Evelyn? Some kind of pathetic melodrama? You left your own wedding. You're embarrassing the entire family. No, Julian, I said. My voice is cold and hard as steel. You embarrassed this family. You lied. You manipulated. And you tried to destroy my happiness for your own selfish reasons. But it's over. Over? He sneered, a disbelieving laugh escaping his lips. I was trying to protect you from this con man. He gestured wildly at Robert. No. Clara's voice cut through the air, sharp and final. You were trying to control her. You used me. You lied to me. And you lied to our whole family. Julian's face went white with fury as he realized he had lost his most important pawn. He turned his venom on her. You are coming home with me, Clara. Now. No, Julian, I'm not, she said, her voice quiet but unshakable. I'm staying with my mother tonight. We have a lot to talk about. And you and I, we have nothing to say. She stepped back from the doorway and closed the door in his face. We stood in the silence of the hallway, the sound of his enraged shouting fading as he walked back to his car. The battle for Clara's soul was far from over, but in that moment she had chosen her mother. She had chosen truth. The next day, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my estate lawyer. The second was to a financial advisor. I had spent 15 years as a curator of the past. Now, it was time to become the architect of my future. And the first step was to build a firewall. A week later, Robert and I were married. There was no grand conservatory, no string quartet, no sea of empty chairs. Our wedding took place in the backyard of my home, under the shade of the old oak tree where Arthur and I had carved our initials so many years ago. It was a simple, heartfelt ceremony, attended by a small, loyal group of our dearest friends. Maria stood by my side, her smile radiant. Clara was there. She was my maid of honor. Her eyes were clear and full of a quiet, fierce love. She wore the antique locket I had given her, a symbol not of a past that trapped us, but of a legacy of strength she was finally claiming as her own. Her journey back from the brink had been a difficult one. She had returned to the yacht that day, not to celebrate, but to confront her husband. She told me she walked onto that floating palace of vanity, found Julian holding court with his partners, and with a cold, quiet fury he had never seen before, told him their marriage was over in front of everyone. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Julian, the master manipulator, had finally lost control of his own narrative. The rest of my family was not there. They were casualties of a war they hadn't even understood they were fighting. My sister Carol had left me a rambling, tearful voicemail, half apology, half accusation, blaming me for causing a scene and ruining Julian's big day. I hadn't returned the call. Perhaps one day some of those bridges could be rebuilt. Perhaps not. But as I stood there holding Robert's hand, the warm autumn sun on my face, I did not feel their absence as a loss. I felt it as a clarification. My new life had a smaller guest list, but every person in it was there because they chose to be. They had chosen love over power, sincerity over spectacle. The day after the wedding, Clara and I met with my estate lawyer. With my daughter's full support, I restructured everything: my will, my trusts, my power of attorney. I created a new foundation, ironclad and untouchable, designed to protect my assets and ensure that my future and Clara's would be dictated by our choices, not by Julian's greed. It was a quiet, legal, and deeply satisfying declaration of independence. A month later, Clara moved into her own apartment. She was starting over, bruised but not broken. I watched her direct the movers with a new confidence, a lightness in her step I hadn't seen in years. She was finally free from the gilded cage Julian had built around her. That evening, Robert and I were in the living room, the room that was once a sacred, untouchable museum. We had painted it, a warm, beautiful cream color that caught the evening light. Robert was sitting in an armchair, reading, and I was at the piano, my fingers drifting over the keys. I wasn't playing one of the somber symphonies from my old life. I was playing something new, something light and full of hope. Robert looked up from his book and smiled, a real easy smile that reached his eyes. "That's beautiful, Evelyn," he said. I smiled back. "It's a new song." The quiet, orderly museum of my past was finally closed. I was no longer its curator. I was standing in the bright, messy, and beautiful reality of my future, a future I was building with my own 2 hands, next to a man who was not afraid of the light. And for the first time in 15 years, I had never felt less alone. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.